Emily and Mark seemed like the perfect couple, living a picture-perfect life in a quiet suburb. But behind closed doors, a dark secret was tearing their world apart. One that involved the person Emily trusted most, her own mother. Emily and Mark appeared to have the perfect life. From the outside, their marriage looked like a dream come true. They lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood with neatly trimmed lawns, friendly neighbors, and the kind of house that always seemed ready for a family photo. On weekends, they hosted gatherings with friends, smiling over wine glasses and laughing at shared jokes. Mark worked as a project manager at a successful firm, often praised by colleagues for his charm and efficiency, while Emily managed her career in marketing, balancing work and home with seemingly effortless grace. Everyone who knew them assumed their life was stable and harmonious. Despite appearances, small cracks were beginning to show. Emily sometimes noticed Mark staring off into the distance, his expression unreadable. Late nights at work became more frequent, and he grew quieter, more withdrawn. She dismissed it at first, telling herself he was just stressed or tired, and that she was overthinking. Still, an uneasy feeling lingered in the pit of her stomach, subtle yet persistent. Friends occasionally made offhand comments about how Mark and Emily seemed polite but distant, but Emily brushed them off, unwilling to believe there could be a problem in her marriage. Family gatherings, once warm and easy, started feeling tense. Mark's smile sometimes didn't reach his eyes, and Emily felt moments of isolation even when surrounded by people who loved her. It was the kind of tension that whispers quietly beneath the surface, invisible to the world, yet impossible to ignore. Everything seemed normal, but Emily could sense that her perfect life was beginning to shift, though she had no idea just how much danger was lurking in the shadows of her own home. The feeling of unease grew stronger with each passing day, a quiet warning of the betrayal that was silently taking root. Emily's life began to change the moment her mother, Linda, decided to move closer. Linda had always been charming in small doses, warm, attentive, and full of advice, but living under the same neighborhood roof brought a new intensity to her presence. She claimed retirement had given her the freedom to settle nearby, painting the move as a simple desire to be close to her daughter. Emily welcomed her mother, excited for the company and support. She imagined long afternoons of conversation, shared meals, and laughter echoing through the house. What Emily didn't anticipate was the subtle, almost imperceptible shift that would come with her mother's arrival. Linda seemed unusually interested in Mark, paying him compliments that felt slightly off, lingering a little too long on casual touches, and offering to help with tasks that were clearly personal. At first, Emily chalked it up to her mother being friendly and overly involved, but tiny details began to nag at her subconscious. A glance that lingered too long, a laugh shared privately between mother and husband, moments that felt just a little too intimate. All of it was easy to dismiss, yet impossible to fully ignore. Mark, for his part, seemed to respond to Linda's presence with a subtle shift in behavior. He smiled more readily around her, shared stories he never told Emily, and seemed almost energized by her company. Their closeness didn't seem alarming at first, but it carried a weight that Emily couldn't place. It was as if the boundaries of their marriage were slowly being tested, and Emily was blind to the danger in plain sight. In the quiet moments after her mother arrived, Emily felt a tension she couldn't explain, a flicker of worry that would grow into something far darker than she could ever imagine. The seeds of betrayal were quietly being sown, hidden behind the guise of family care and familiarity. Mark and Linda's growing closeness began to take shape in ways that made Emily uneasy, though she struggled to pinpoint exactly why. What had started as casual visits and small favors began to evolve into something more frequent and private. They spent hours together at social events, often leaving Emily behind or engaging in conversations that seemed coded, filled with inside jokes and subtle glances. Emily noticed Mark checking his phone more often, smiling at messages he never showed her, while Linda's expressions carried a mixture of amusement and something harder to define. From the outside, it looked innocent, but Emily's instincts whispered otherwise. The pair also found reasons to meet one-on-one, attending local markets, community gatherings, or errands in town. Their trips were framed as casual outings, yet Emily began noticing patterns. Mark would call to say he was busy or running late, and Linda always had a ready explanation. Neighbors started remarking, quietly and innocently, about how often they seemed to be together. Emily brushed off the comments, unwilling to consider the possibility that something deeper was happening, but the unease in her chest grew stronger with each passing day. Even at home, subtle changes were noticeable. Mark's laughter sometimes seemed tinged with secrecy, and Linda's presence in the house had an intensity that made Emily feel like an outsider in her own home. The warmth she expected from family visits had been replaced with a quiet tension, a sense that boundaries were being crossed in ways that weren't visible to anyone else. Emily wanted to believe it was harmless, that her imagination was running wild, but the connection between her husband and mother lingered like a shadow. Something unspoken was growing between them, an invisible thread that pulled tighter with every smile, every private exchange, leaving Emily trapped in a growing web of suspicion she couldn't yet fully untangle. Emily's first concrete suspicion came in the form of cryptic messages on Mark's phone. She hadn't meant to look, but a notification popped up while he was in the shower, and curiosity got the better of her. The texts were brief, flirtatious, and oddly coded, filled with inside jokes and affectionate phrases she didn't recognize. At first, she tried to rationalize what she saw, convincing herself they might be harmless exchanges with a friend or work colleague. But the tone felt different, private in a way that made her skin crawl. Each message seemed to carry layers of intimacy that Mark would never share with her. Emily reread them over and over, noting the timing and wording. There were late-night exchanges, hidden emojis, and hints of plans made in secrecy. The realization began to settle slowly. Someone had crossed a line, though she didn't yet know who. Her mind raced, imagining every possible scenario, searching for logical explanations while a pit of dread formed in her stomach. The thought that it could be a serious betrayal was terrifying, yet she felt powerless to confront it without proof. Emily tried to maintain normalcy, going about her daily routine while her anxiety quietly built. She avoided asking Mark about the messages directly, fearing his denial and the tension it would create. The secrecy itself felt like a trap, a quiet, suffocating presence that followed her everywhere. Friends and neighbors noticed her distracted demeanor, though she offered only vague excuses for her unease. The more Emily thought about the messages, the more she realized that this was only the beginning. Something hidden was growing, something that threatened the foundation of her marriage. The cryptic words on a glowing phone screen were not just harmless chatter. They were the first clear sign of a betrayal far deeper and more intimate than Emily could yet comprehend, a secret that would soon unravel her entire world. Mark's late nights at work became more frequent, and Emily couldn't ignore the change any longer. He claimed that deadlines were piling up, that projects required extra attention, and that stress was taking its toll. At first, Emily wanted to believe him. She understood the pressures of a demanding job and tried to give him space, telling herself that his exhaustion explained the distant glances, the distracted conversations, and the sudden withdrawal from their evening routines. Yet, there was a growing inconsistency in his stories, small details that didn't add up and excuses that felt rehearsed. Linda, ever the supportive mother, offered to help fill the gaps. She would call Emily to say that Mark was busy with errands, working late, or attending meetings, always making her presence seem comforting and reassuring. At the same time, Emily noticed subtle changes in Mark's behavior. His phone was rarely out in the open, notifications disappeared quickly, and he often retreated to private spaces under the pretense of work calls. The combination of his absences and her mother's seemingly innocent involvement created a pattern Emily couldn't ignore, though she hesitated to confront it. Even at home, the tension was palpable. Meals were eaten quietly. Casual conversations felt strained, and Emily sometimes caught Mark exchanging knowing glances with Linda. These small moments, fleeting but frequent, left her with a gnawing unease. Friends who visited remarked on the distance between them, but Emily brushed it off, unwilling to acknowledge the full scope of what might be happening. The uncertainty began to consume her. She questioned her instincts, wondering if she was overreacting, while the feeling that something was deeply wrong only intensified. Each late night and unexplained absence added another layer of suspicion, pulling Emily deeper into a growing sense of dread. What she didn't yet realize was that these nights marked the early stages of a deception far more Emily's unease intensified one afternoon when she found a small, folded note tucked inside the pocket of Mark's coat. It was unassuming at first glance, just a scrap of paper with a few words written in familiar handwriting. Her heart raced as she unfolded it, revealing a message signed with her mother's initials. The words were casual yet personal, hinting at a shared understanding between Mark and Linda that Emily had never been a part of. Confusion mixed with a creeping sense of betrayal. She held the note in her hands, turning it over again and again, as if the act of examining it might reveal an innocent explanation. Emily wrestled with disbelief. How could something like this exist in her marriage? The note was small, almost insignificant, yet it carried a weight that made her stomach churn. Her mind ran through every possible scenario, trying to rationalize what she had found. Maybe it was a joke, a miscommunication, or an overfamiliar gesture from her mother. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was a line crossed, a signal of secrecy and intimacy that should never exist between her husband and her mother. Despite the shock, Emily didn't confront Mark immediately. Fear of denial, of argument, or worse, of confirmation, made her hesitant. She tucked the note away, hiding it carefully, and watched Mark closely over the following days. Every glance, every word, every action seemed loaded with new meaning. Her awareness heightened. She began noticing the subtle ways they communicated, the fleeting moments of shared amusement, the too quick exchanges that seemed ordinary to anyone else. The folded note became a silent torment. It was a small, tangible piece of evidence, yet it left her suspended in uncertainty. She was caught between suspicion and disbelief, unable to act, yet unable to ignore the truth simmering just beneath the surface. In that moment, Emily realized that her perfect world had begun to crack in the shadows of betrayal. The tension between Mark and Linda became impossible to ignore during a family gathering at Emily and Mark's home. What had once been casual and friendly now carried an undercurrent of something more intense. As the evening unfolded, Mark and Linda found themselves engaged in a private conversation that lasted far longer than necessary. They leaned toward each other, exchanging words in low tones, their faces occasionally breaking into shared smiles that Emily couldn't understand. The rest of the guests carried on, oblivious to the small but telling dynamics unfolding in front of them. But Emily felt a growing unease tighten around her chest. She watched as Mark's attention seemed divided, his eyes constantly flicking toward Linda, searching for some unspoken signal. Linda, for her part, appeared entirely at ease, radiating confidence and warmth, yet there was a subtle intensity in her gaze that unsettled Emily. Every laugh they shared, every small gesture, a hand brushing against another or a conspiratorial glance, felt like a secret Emily was not meant to see. It was a mixture of familiarity and intimacy that went far beyond the ordinary bonds of family. Emily's discomfort grew as she realized that this closeness had become performative in public, hidden in plain sight. Their private exchanges created a tension that hovered like a storm cloud, impossible to ignore but hard to confront. She began to notice patterns she hadn't seen before. How often they found reasons to be alone together, how quickly their expressions shifted when she entered the room, and the way Mark's voice softened when speaking to her mother. The evening ended without confrontation, but the unease lingered. Emily felt trapped between the polite appearances of family and the unmistakable signs of betrayal unfolding before her. The private conversation, brief yet loaded with significance, became a turning point, a moment where suspicion solidified into a quiet certainty that something forbidden was taking root. The cracks in her marriage were widening, and Emily could no longer pretend that everything was normal. Emily felt a growing sense of isolation that she could no longer ignore. The subtle signs of Mark and Linda's closeness haunted her, and the more she observed, the more she realized how alone she had become, even within her own home. Meals, once warm and filled with conversation, now passed in strained silence. Mark's attention seemed perpetually divided, and Linda's presence, once comforting, now carried an almost suffocating intensity. Emily began withdrawing from friends and social gatherings, unable to shake the feeling that the betrayal was happening everywhere, in every glance and every laugh she wasn't a part of. Even casual interactions outside the home felt tainted. Friends who visited seemed to notice her distracted demeanor and quiet frustration, offering subtle words of concern. Emily, however, deflected their questions, unwilling to reveal the unease gnawing at her. She convinced herself it was paranoia, though deep down she knew that something was very wrong. The isolation created a pressure, making her hyper-aware of every interaction between Mark and Linda, each one feeling more charged than the last. Emily's nights became restless. She replayed moments over and over in her mind. The laughter they shared, the private jokes, the fleeting touches she had once dismissed as harmless. Each memory now carried a weight she couldn't ignore. The walls of her home, which had once felt safe, now seemed like a stage where betrayal was quietly unfolding. Her anxiety intensified, leaving her feeling trapped in a growing web of suspicion. Emily's instincts screamed that the situation was far from innocent, yet she lacked proof. The more she tried to convince herself otherwise, the clearer it became that her life was quietly unraveling. Every glance, every secretive smile, every unexplained absence served as a reminder that the shadow of betrayal was creeping closer, and Emily could feel herself being drawn deeper into its grip. Mark suggested a weekend vacation, framing it as a way to reconnect and escape the stress of their daily lives. Emily hesitated at first, feeling the tension that had been building between them, but eventually agreed, hoping that a change of scenery might restore a sense of normalcy. They packed their bags, drove to a scenic lakeside town, and checked into a cozy rental cabin. The surroundings were peaceful, and the crisp air, gentle waves, and quiet streets seemed like the perfect opportunity for the couple to reconnect. Emily allowed herself a small measure of hope, convincing herself that this trip could bring them closer again. At first, the vacation felt ordinary. They walked along the shoreline, visited local shops, and had meals together in small cafes. Mark was attentive at times, polite and affectionate, giving Emily fleeting glimpses of the husband she had once trusted completely. Yet beneath the surface, Emily sensed something was off. Mark's phone stayed constantly by his side, buzzing with messages he immediately concealed. He seemed distracted, often stepping away for calls or private conversations. Emily noticed subtle changes in his expressions, small smiles that didn't include her, and laughter at something she couldn't hear or understand. Unbeknownst to Emily, Linda was involved even during this supposed escape. Messages exchanged in secret dictated meetings, errands, and private encounters that Mark carefully hid from his wife. The distance that was meant to restore intimacy instead highlighted the growing gap between them. Emily felt an increasing sense of unease, a shadow lingering over every moment of the trip. What was meant to be a chance to reconnect only served as a reminder that something hidden was thriving right under her nose, a betrayal growing bolder with each passing hour, and she had no idea how deep it truly ran. Emily's growing suspicion finally pushed her to take action. After sleepless nights filled with anxiety and silent observation, she decided to install security cameras at home, telling herself it was simply for peace of mind. The cameras were small and discreet, positioned in common areas where Mark and Linda spent the most time. Emily told herself it was a precaution, a way to ensure safety, but deep down she hoped they would reveal nothing. Anything that confirmed her fears would shatter her completely. At first, the footage seemed mundane. Mark went about his daily routines, and Linda visited often, chatting and helping with small tasks around the house. Nothing overtly suspicious appeared, and Emily felt a fleeting sense of relief, though a knot of tension remained in her chest. She watched carefully, studying their movements, the subtle shifts in expressions, the moments when their attention lingered on each other for just a beat too long. Then, one evening, the truth could no longer be denied. Emily reviewed the footage from a quiet afternoon when she had stepped out for errands. The camera captured Mark and Linda alone, their interactions far too intimate to be innocent. Gestures that had once seemed harmless now carried unmistakable significance, soft touches, lingering embraces, and an unspoken closeness that left Emily paralyzed with shock. Her stomach churned as she replayed the video again and again, trying to process the betrayal in front of her eyes. The footage confirmed what Emily had feared but had been unable to prove until now. Mark and Linda's secret had crossed the boundary of marital loyalty, transforming suspicion into undeniable evidence. The knowledge left Emily reeling, a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief. What had been hidden in shadows was now exposed in cold, unflinching reality, and there was no turning back. The betrayal was real, and it had been happening right under her nose. Emily's shock at discovering the footage left her with a storm of emotions she struggled to control. She confronted Mark privately, choosing a quiet evening at home when the tension between them felt almost unbearable. Her voice trembled as she demanded answers, though she tried to maintain a semblance of calm. Mark, however, was quick to deny everything. His charm, once comforting, became a weapon of manipulation. He accused Emily of paranoia, of letting her imagination run wild, and painted her suspicions as insecurity rather than reality. His words were smooth and calculated, designed to confuse and disarm, and for a moment, Emily doubted herself, wondering if she had misinterpreted the signs. Linda, ever the protector of her own secrets, immediately stepped in, defending Mark with a practiced ease. Her calm demeanor and carefully chosen words made Emily feel cornered, as if the betrayal was not only hidden but reinforced by those closest to her. The denial, combined with Linda's support, created a suffocating tension in the house. Emily could see the complicity in their actions, the unspoken bond that had been forming for months. It was as if they were partners in deception, working together to keep her in the dark. Even after the confrontation ended, Emily's mind raced. The evidence on her phone, the notes, the hidden glances, everything suddenly made sense, and yet Mark's denials lingered, poisoning the air between them. She realized that facing the truth would be far more complicated than she had imagined. The emotional manipulation left her questioning not just Mark's loyalty, but her own judgment. For the first time, Emily felt the full weight of isolation and betrayal. The man she had trusted completely and the mother she had loved were now entwined in a web of deceit that threatened to unravel her life entirely, leaving her unsure of who, if anyone, she could trust. Emily's world began to crumble in the days following the confrontation. The denial and manipulation from Mark, coupled with Linda's quiet complicity, left her emotionally drained and unsure of where to turn. She felt trapped in a house that had once been her sanctuary, now transformed into a stage for deceit and betrayal. Simple routines, making coffee, folding laundry, even walking through the rooms she had once loved, now felt heavy with tension, each corner a reminder of the secret that had invaded her life. Anxiety became a constant companion, gnawing at her from the inside. Sleep offered little relief. Nights were spent replaying moments in her mind. The hidden messages, the stolen glances, the laughter she had once thought innocent but now knew was shared in secrecy. Emily found herself obsessively monitoring Mark's movements, noticing the way he interacted with her mother, the private smiles, the coded gestures she had once dismissed. Every detail reinforced the knowledge that the betrayal was ongoing, leaving her with a deep, persistent ache. Isolation crept in as she pulled away from friends and family. Calls and invitations were ignored or politely declined, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts. Even those closest to her began to notice the change, but she could not explain the depth of her pain without revealing the full truth. The weight of secrecy and suspicion pressed down on her, creating a suffocating pressure that seemed impossible to escape. Amid the emotional turmoil, Emily began to understand the magnitude of the situation. This was more than a simple betrayal. It was a carefully constructed web of lies and manipulation, one that involved the people she had trusted most. The affair between Mark and Linda had reshaped her reality, leaving Emily to navigate a growing storm of hurt, anger, and uncertainty. Each day that passed without resolution deepened the emotional chasm, and Emily realized she could no longer ignore the danger lurking in her owl. ChatGPT said, desperate for guidance, Emily turned to her closest friend, someone she had trusted for years. She had kept her suspicions and discoveries bottled up for too long, fearing judgment or disbelief. Sharing the truth felt like stepping into a vulnerable space, exposing the raw edges of her pain. Her friend listened quietly, absorbing every detail. The cryptic messages, the hidden notes, the unsettling closeness between Mark and Linda, and the damning footage Emily had captured. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a flicker of relief. She was not alone in seeing what had been happening. Her friend's response was measured but firm, offering both emotional support and practical advice. She urged Emily to gather undeniable proof before confronting Mark and Linda again. The suggestion was simple in words, but heavy in implication. Emily realized that careful planning was now necessary to protect herself and ensure that the betrayal could not be dismissed or hidden. Together, they discussed strategies, documenting interactions, preserving evidence, and maintaining a calm exterior to avoid tipping Mark and Linda off. It was a delicate balance, requiring patience and resolve, but Emily felt a sense of purpose she had been missing. The conversations with her friend also gave Emily perspective. She began to see the affair not just as an isolated act of betrayal, but as part of a pattern of manipulation and secrecy that had been developing for months. Each piece of evidence fit into a larger, unsettling picture. The reality was undeniable. Mark and Linda had been deliberately orchestrating their actions to deceive her, and confronting them recklessly could backfire. Emily's mind became a careful mix of observation and strategy. She learned to watch quietly, listen carefully, and record subtle details without revealing her knowledge. The support of her friend gave her courage, transforming fear into determination. For the first time since discovering the affair, Emily felt she might regain some control over the situation, preparing herself for the next steps in uncovering the full truth. Mark and Linda's secret meetings became increasingly calculated, almost surgical in their precision. Emily, now cautious and observant, noticed subtle shifts in their behavior that revealed the lengths they were willing to go to maintain their hidden connection. They chose locations carefully, rented apartments, quiet cafes, and secluded spots in town, always ensuring they could meet without raising suspicion. Their interactions were no longer spontaneous. Every encounter was planned, timed, and executed with careful attention to detail. Emily, watching from the edges of awareness, began piecing together a pattern, realizing that the affair was deliberate, organized, and far more serious than she had imagined. Each meeting was a mix of tension and secrecy. Mark would leave the house under various pretenses: late work calls, errands, or brief trips, while Linda would appear conveniently coincidental, always ready to provide cover or create an alibi. The two communicated in subtle ways, often using messages or coded language to coordinate without leaving evidence visible to Emily. Every smile, every private gesture, and every brief touch seemed rehearsed, as though they were perfecting the performance of a relationship hidden in plain sight. Emily's awareness of their calculated deception left her both anxious and resolute. She realized that this was not a fleeting attraction or a simple lapse in judgment. It was a sustained, intentional betrayal. The sense of control she had once had over her home and her life felt increasingly fragile. Each carefully orchestrated meeting served as a reminder of how deeply Mark and Linda's alliance had formed and how skillfully they had been hiding it. Watching them operate in secret, Emily felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and determination. The affair was no longer an abstract suspicion. It was a tangible reality, unfolding with precision and intent. She knew that gathering evidence and understanding their patterns would be crucial in confronting the truth and reclaiming her life, even as the web of deception grew ever more intricate and suffocating. Emily's worst fears were confirmed one afternoon in a moment she had not anticipated. While tidying up the house, she stumbled upon a small, carefully wrapped gift tucked away in a drawer. It was addressed to Mark, but the handwriting was unmistakably her mother's. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This was no innocent gesture, no casual token of affection. It was intimate, personal, and undeniable evidence that the bond between Mark and Linda had crossed lines that should never have existed. Her hands shook as she held the package, a mix of anger, shock, and profound hurt churning inside her. For a moment, Emily froze, unable to process the magnitude of what she had discovered. The months of subtle signs, the lingering glances, the cryptic messages, and the private meetings all suddenly made sense. Each moment she had questioned, each uneasy feeling she had dismissed, now coalesced into a stark, painful reality. The gift was a tangible proof of betrayal, a symbol of intimacy shared behind her back. Emily's mind raced. She replayed recent memories in vivid detail, noticing gestures and conversations that had seemed harmless but now carried a hidden significance. The weight of the discovery was almost suffocating, and yet it provided clarity she had been desperately seeking. For the first time, the abstract suspicions and quiet fears transformed into concrete evidence she could not ignore. Though overwhelmed, Emily felt a growing determination. The discovery of the gift changed everything. It confirmed what she had long feared but could not fully articulate. This was no fleeting attraction or innocent closeness. It was a deliberate and ongoing betrayal. The reality of Mark and Linda's secret left Emily reeling, but it also ignited a resolve to uncover the full extent of the affair and confront the truth, no matter how painful it would be. Emily's discovery of the gift marked a turning point. She realized that if she was going to protect herself and uncover the full truth, she could no longer rely on chance. She needed to gather evidence systematically. With a sense of determination, she began observing Mark and Linda's movements with precision, tracking their routines, phone calls, and interactions. She noted patterns, times of absence, and subtle behaviors that previously seemed insignificant. Every detail became a potential clue, every glance or hushed conversation a piece of a puzzle she was determined to solve. Technology became her ally. Emily discreetly monitored Mark's phone activity, noting messages that appeared and disappeared too quickly to see. She set up additional security measures, recording interactions when she sensed secrecy. Even small errands or trips out of the house were scrutinized, mapped, and analyzed. She began documenting dates, times, and suspicious behavior, creating a record that could not be dismissed or denied. The process required patience and restraint, forcing her to observe quietly and avoid revealing her awareness. Emily's mental state became a mixture of anxiety and focus. She replayed moments in her head, reconstructing conversations, gestures, and interactions to understand the depth of the affair. The closer she looked, the clearer the pattern became. Mark and Linda's relationship was deliberate, ongoing, and carefully concealed. The betrayal was not just emotional, it was systematic. Through careful observation and quiet investigation, Emily gained a measure of control over the chaos that had consumed her. Each piece of evidence she collected strengthened her resolve. She understood now that uncovering the truth would require patience and courage, but with each observation, she moved closer to clarity. The affair was no longer a shadowy suspicion. It was a documented reality, and Emily was determined to confront it on her own terms. Emily's patience and careful observation finally led to the moment she had both dreaded and anticipated. One evening, returning home earlier than usual from work, she stepped quietly through the front door, intending to check on the house before Mark arrived. The quiet hum of the evening was broken only by the faint murmur of voices from the living room. Her heart sank as she recognized them immediately. Mark and Linda were together, and their interaction was far more intimate than anything she had previously imagined. The sight was undeniable, a raw confirmation of everything she had feared. Time seemed to slow as Emily watched, paralyzed by shock and disbelief. The gestures she had once rationalized as harmless, a lingering touch, a shared smile, the closeness in conversation, were now revealed in full clarity. Each movement, each subtle expression, carried the weight of betrayal. The home that had once felt safe and familiar now seemed foreign, invaded by a secret that had been thriving under her nose. For Emily, the emotional impact was immediate and overwhelming. Anger, hurt, and sorrow surged in equal measure, a tidal wave of emotion that left her momentarily numb. She realized that the secrecy and manipulation she had observed for months had reached its peak, unfolding in the very space she had once considered a sanctuary. This moment of confrontation, though unplanned, was also a moment of clarity. There was no longer any ambiguity. Mark and Linda's affair was real, deliberate, and ongoing. Emily's sense of betrayal was now tangible, a deep wound that demanded acknowledgement and action. The stark reality of what she had witnessed marked a turning point. The betrayal was no longer hidden, and Emily could no longer remain a passive observer. The next steps she would take were uncertain, but one thing was clear. Her life had been irrevocably changed, and the consequences of this hidden affair would soon unfold. Determined to understand the full scope of the betrayal, Emily began digging into her mother's past. She had long trusted Linda, seeing her as a loving and caring presence. But the recent revelations forced her to question everything. What she discovered was unsettling. Linda had a history of manipulative behavior, marked by a pattern of secretive relationships and emotional control. Friends and distant relatives hinted at affairs that had been carefully hidden, each story revealing a woman's skilled at deception and secrecy. The realization sent a chill through Emily. This was not a one-time lapse in judgment, but part of a recurring pattern. As Emily pieced together the fragments of her mother's history, she began to see her own experiences in a new light. The subtle manipulation, the private meetings, the intimate gestures, they were consistent with behaviors Linda had displayed in the past. The betrayal she felt was not merely personal. It was part of a larger pattern of emotional exploitation. Every smile, every secretive glance, every carefully hidden message now carried a disturbing weight, confirming that Mark had aligned himself with someone capable of premeditated deceit. The revelation also deepened Emily's sense of anger and hurt. It was not only the intimate betrayal by her husband, but the collusion with someone she had loved and trusted her entire life. The realization that Linda had orchestrated aspects of the affair, consciously manipulating both Emily and Mark, intensified the emotional devastation. Emily understood that she was dealing with a sophisticated deception, one that had been building for months, if not years. This knowledge fueled a resolve to act deliberately, to gather undeniable proof and confront the truth fully. The betrayal was now framed not only as a marital violation, but as a long-standing pattern of manipulation, and Emily knew that exposing it would require courage, patience, and careful planning. The depth of the betrayal left Emily seething with a mixture of anger, heartbreak, and determination. She realized that confronting Mark and Linda recklessly could backfire, that she needed a plan to regain control and ensure they could not manipulate or dismiss her. For the first time, she began thinking strategically, weighing her options carefully. Divorce was on the table, but so was exposing the affair to friends, family, and anyone who might otherwise be deceived. The idea of public exposure gave her a sense of power, a way to reclaim some of what had been taken from her. Emily spent long hours reflecting on her next steps. She considered legal action, documenting the affair, and gathering evidence that would leave no room for denial. She mapped out Mark and Linda's routines, identifying moments where their secrecy could be monitored or interrupted. Each interaction, each movement, became a critical part of her investigation, and her determination grew with every new detail she recorded. The emotional intensity of the situation fueled her focus, turning her hurt into a calculated drive for accountability. At the same time, Emily allowed herself moments of emotional clarity. She thought about the long-term consequences of exposure versus quiet resolution, realizing that her decisions would shape not only her future, but the relationships around her. She had to be careful, precise, and deliberate. This chapter of planning was both exhausting and empowering. Emily no longer felt like a passive victim of deceit. She was an active participant in reclaiming her life. The betrayal had been deliberate, and now, so would be her response. With careful observation, meticulous documentation, and a clear strategy, Emily prepared to confront the truth on her own terms, ensuring that Mark and Linda could no longer manipulate, hide, or control the narrative of their affair. The storm of betrayal was about to meet the calculated force of her resolve. The moment of revelation came like a thunderclap. Emily, armed with months of careful observation, documented evidence, and a deep understanding of the affair, decided it was time to expose the truth. She called friends and family together, creating a space where nothing could be hidden. The atmosphere was tense, charged with anticipation, as Emily prepared to unveil the deception that had haunted her life for months. She felt a mixture of fear, anger, and determination, knowing that once the truth was out, there would be no going back. As she revealed the details, the cryptic messages, the hidden notes, the intimate gift, and the footage she had captured, shock rippled through the room. Friends and family listened in disbelief, their faces reflecting the same betrayal Emily had felt. Mark and Linda's carefully constructed facade crumbled under the weight of undeniable evidence. The smiles, the excuses, the denials, they all fell away, leaving them exposed in their duplicity. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. Social connections strained, mutual acquaintances took sides, and the quiet respect Mark and Linda had cultivated evaporated. Emily's sense of vindication was tempered by the rawness of emotion. The betrayal was no longer a shadowy secret. It had been confronted openly, and the consequences were unfolding with startling clarity. Mark and Linda could no longer hide behind charm or manipulation. Their reputations, trust, and relationships were fractured beyond repair. In that moment, Emily felt a powerful mixture of closure and sorrow. The betrayal had been devastating, but the act of exposing it allowed her to reclaim control. She had confronted the hidden truth, and the fallout, though painful, marked the beginning of a new chapter. The storm of deceit had been laid bare, and Emily stood at the center, determined to rebuild her life and protect herself from the shadows of betrayal that had once threatened to consume her completely. With the affair exposed, Emily turned her attention to the practical consequences. Divorce was inevitable, and she wanted to ensure that it was handled carefully and fairly. She sought legal counsel, learning about her rights and the options available to protect herself from further manipulation. The evidence she had collected, the messages, notes, footage, and documented patterns of secrecy, became crucial in building a case that could not be dismissed. Emily understood that this was not just about ending a marriage. It was about accountability and reclaiming control over her life. Mark and Linda faced immediate social and personal consequences. Friends and family who had once admired their composure now viewed them with shock and disdain. The betrayal that had been hidden for so long became public knowledge, and their reputations suffered irreparable damage. Emily observed the ripple effect of exposure. The way whispered conversations, strained relationships, and disappointed acquaintances reflected the gravity of their actions. For the first time, she felt a sense of justice unfolding, even as the emotional toll remained heavy. Throughout the process, Emily remained deliberate and focused. She maintained detailed records of interactions, monitored attempts at manipulation, and ensured that Mark and Linda could not exploit the situation to their advantage. The careful planning she had invested months into now paid off, giving her the ability to confront the fallout with clarity and strength. Though the legal proceedings and public exposure were painful, Emily felt a growing sense of empowerment. She had transformed from a passive victim into an active force, taking control of a situation that had threatened to destroy her. The affair's consequences were real, tangible, and unavoidable, and Emily was determined to navigate them on her own terms. Each step she took reinforced her resilience, proving that even in the aftermath of betrayal, she could reclaim her life. The months following the exposure of the affair were difficult, but they marked the beginning of Emily's journey toward rebuilding her life. The betrayal had left deep emotional scars, and the absence of trust created a hollow space where heartbreak had once lived. She took time to process her emotions, allowing herself to grieve not only the marriage she had believed in, but also the mother-daughter relationship she had thought was unbreakable. Slowly, she began to understand that healing required distance, reflection, and a conscious effort to reclaim her sense of self. Emily focused on restoring her independence, revisiting passions and routines that had been sidelined during the turmoil. She reconnected with friends who offered unwavering support, leaning on them for guidance, companionship, and reassurance. Each small step, whether a walk alone, a quiet evening spent reading, or a shared laugh with a trusted friend, became a building block in reconstructing the life that had been disrupted by betrayal. The process was neither quick nor linear, but it was empowering. She also took time to reflect on the lessons learned from the experience. Trust, she realized, was fragile and must be earned consistently. Boundaries and vigilance were necessary, not as a reflection of cynicism, but as a way to protect oneself from being blindsided by deception. Emily's experience left her wiser, more self-aware, and better equipped to navigate relationships in the future. Eventually, Emily found a sense of peace. The past remained a painful memory, but it no longer defined her. She had survived the deception, confronted the betrayal, and emerged stronger. Though scars remained, they were reminders of resilience rather than weakness. Emily had reclaimed her life, proving that even in the aftermath of the deepest betrayal, it was possible to rebuild, move forward, and create a future shaped by strength, awareness, and self-respect.